All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the purpose of the flash for real estate photography and how to use it properly. So I've got a few images here from a couple of recent properties, and we're just going to go through these and talk about how I used the flash with these images right here. So for 90% of the image, 90% of the image is it's an exposure that was captured not using the flash. That's pretty much how I do all my editing, basically. So I will take the non-flash images and I will use that about 90% of the time. And then I will use the flash images basically just to bring in the overexposed areas of the windows. And I don't use the flash images for the outside exterior views. If I use the flash images for the outside exterior views, typically they're going to have those harsh reflections in the mirror and things like that. So basically the purpose of the flash is just to take down, the overexposed areas of the window areas, the window frames, things like that, you know. It's really just there to help tame and neutralize those overexposed areas. So let's go ahead and take a look at the raw images for this shot right here. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Bridge, and here are all of the raw images. We're just going to go through these real quick here. So there's about 8 or 9 total, I think. And these right here are the non-flash images. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and here we are with the flash images. Here's another, there's another flash, and there's another flash. And we're back to the non-flash images. So as my base, I would take this into Camera Raw, adjust it, bring it into Photoshop, then I would open up probably this one in Camera Raw, make those adjustments, and all I'm doing is just, using this to take down those overexposed areas of the window frame, things like that. Generally, I would avoid using a flash that looks like this because it's starting to take on the typical look of what a flash looks like, and that's what you want to avoid, right? You want to avoid those reflections in metallic surfaces. You want to avoid the armrests on couches, lamps, things like that. The surrounding area, you don't want it to look like it has that glow of how it's being illuminated with the flash, right? You don't want it to look like this. That's not a good look. You want it to look very professional, and that's what your non-flash images are going to give you, right? You want to subtly blend in the flashes into your images. So if I was in Photoshop, I would just take this into Camera Raw, make some really quick adjustments, This is my non-flash image. Again, this is the one that I would use. Cycle through whatever the exposures are, and again, select a flash that doesn't really look like it's a flash, right? I'm not getting those extremely harsh characteristics of the flash with this particular image, so this is the one that I would go with. So I would just bring this into Camera Raw. And again, I'm just focusing on these slightly overexposed areas of the window frame itself, right? That's the purpose of the flash. That's what the flash is going to be used for 99% of the time. And again, I would just come back into Adobe Bridge and cycle through and look for one for the exterior shot. And I would probably go with this one. It's a little too dark outside, so I would crank up the exposure, take down the highlights, take up the shadows, increase the contrast, maybe a little bit, increase the saturation, vibrance, really basic stuff. Take that into Photoshop, save your PSD, and then, with a soft brush, I'm just going to paint this in slightly and subtly into the surrounding area just a little bit, and just, into the overexposed areas. That's pretty much all I'm doing with the flash when it comes to how I edit and how we shoot. Right? Then I would come in there with the pen tool, make selections, create masks and things like that, Go to town and do everything that's needed. But that's just a quick example of the purpose of the flash, how I use it, and how you should be using it. You should not be using the flash as your base image. It's going to result in a look that looks like this. This does not look professional. You do not want to have it look like you're using a flash in your final image. Even if you're using a flash image, even if you're using flash exposures or multiple flash exposures in your PSD, in your document, that's okay, as long as it's not looking like it's a flash, right? You don't want the final image to look like it's a flash. You want the final image to look like this, very clean, brightly lit, even, nice colors, nice contrast. The masking is properly done. Things are composited in a professional manner. Things look great overall. You don't want it to look like it's using that flash, right? If you're using flashes in your image and you're brushing them in, painting them in, things like that, make sure that you're removing those harsh reflections and flash characteristics, from metallic surfaces, glass surfaces, things like that, reflections off the TV, anything like that, just keep that in mind. So moving on, here's a living room shot, and here are the raw images right here, and we'll just cycle through these. So here's the non-flash, another non-flash. Here is one with a flash, and you can tell that it's using a flash because of the armrest here on the couch. As we go down in overall brightness with the exposure, we can see more and more that it's a flash, because the darker the image gets, the more apparent it's going to become that we're using a flash, because the surrounding areas, such as the left, right, top, and bottom hand corners, the ceiling, things like that, that flash is going to be emitted more and more because the image is getting darker, but the flash is still bouncing at a high brightness. So the darker we go, the more apparent it's going to become that we're using that flash. But again, that's okay, because I'm not painting in this ceiling or this armrest into the image when I'm using those flashes. Again, this would be my base image. I would make all the standard typical adjustments in Camera Raw, just as a quick example, right? Cool it down, adjust the colors, do everything. Real simple. I'm using this as my base image because it's clean overall. But the problem with that, with these exposures, is that the window areas are, again, they're overexposed and they need to be tamed. They need to be neutralized, right? So that's the purpose of the flash. That's when I would come back into Adobe Bridge and I would cycle through and I would typically select one, maybe two images. But in this case, I would probably end up going with this one. So again, I would take this flash image into Photoshop, make all the necessary adjustments, and instead of really being zoomed out, I'll typically come in here and zoom in. That way I can just kind of focus and settle my attention on those areas that I'm really trying to tackle, because remember, it's not the entire image that I'm trying to tackle right now. It's just the overexposed overexposed areas. So again, I would take that into Photoshop. And here's the non-flash image. Here's the flash image. And again, with the soft brush, I would just come in here and subtly paint this in to the area. One thing that you don't want to do when you're painting in multiple layers is you don't want to do this, right? Even though this area right here, this is basically what I'm focusing on. These areas right here that are selected, these three areas, right? This is really what we want to target. We don't necessarily want to target anything outside of this area. One thing that can happen that I see people do a lot when they're trying to brush in multiple exposures into an image in Photoshop, one thing that they'll do is, since they only want to target that specific area, what they'll do is they'll come in there with a brush and they'll literally just brush it in like this, right? They're just coming in here and they're just brushing it into the area where they want. And this is not good. This is very, very bad, because now we have areas that are not even. This image is not even now. It's very uneven and it looks terrible. So we went from that to this. We went from that to this. And you can see that this is not even because we're getting the characteristics of this exposure painted in heavily into these areas right here, and it results in an uneven image because now these areas are darker. We're getting spillover onto the couches. We're getting spillover onto the walls right here. And it's very obvious that we're doing that. It's almost like we're doing, this is basically what we're doing. This right here, this is what we do not want to do. This is exaggerated, obviously, but this is basically what we're doing on an extreme level, just to give you an idea. But this is basically what we're doing. That's not what you want to do when you're painting these things in. What you want to do is, since you have to paint these things in, you have to make it even. In other words, you can't just select, unless you're going to use the pen tool or polygonal lasso tool and do, very manual selections and things like that. If you're going to use a brush and mask it in by painting it in, you can't just select these areas and paint it in like that. What you have to do is, this is what I do in order to avoid that look. I come in here and I just subtly try to paint in just a little bit into those areas, but in order to avoid that look where it looks like we're painting in just here, just here, just here, I basically am forced into painting it into the surrounding areas. In other words, I'm basically forced. In order to get a clean image, I am forced to paint this in to the surrounding areas. I can't just come in here to these areas that I want. I can't do that because it's going to result in that terrible look. So what I do is I just come in here with a soft brush. I brush it in across from basically left to right and just a little bit at the top. And if I have to go down here into these surrounding areas, that's okay. What I don't want to do is brush this way in. This is not what I want. It's now completely obvious that the middle area of this image has been brushed in and that the top and bottom has not. Again, that's completely uneven. So I'm trying to brush it in just enough so that these areas are tame and neutralized with these overexposed window frames. Just enough that I can obtain that and not have that characteristic of having it look like it was brushed in. When somebody looks at these images, you want it to look like it's all natural. You don't want it to look like there's a flash bouncing off things. You don't want your images to look like you don't want them to look like there was like 12 different images that were all composited together. You just want it to be one flat, even, nice, crisp looking image. So when it comes to doing that, again, I use my soft brush, and since I have to brush it in, I basically am forced to just subtly, just a little bit, brush it in to the surrounding areas. And if things are not consistent, I will brush it in to the top and the bottom. Again, you have to use your best judgment when it comes to this kind of stuff. I hope I'm doing a decent job explaining of things that you need to avoid and things that you need to do in order to get a clean, consistent result. But definitely don't do this. Don't take multiple exposures and brush them in like this. It's going to be completely obvious of what's happening there. Let's say I brushed it in just a little bit too much. I would just take the opacity down to 0 and incrementally increase it until it reaches a point that I'm happy with, right? So here's the before, here's the after. And this is an acceptable result when it comes to using that flash to take that in, to take those overexposed areas down, because it's not obvious that there's a flash here. It's not very obvious. If I saw this photo right here, what we're looking at for the first time, I would look at it and I would say, there's no flash being used here because it's such a subtle amount. Again, you don't want to have it. You don't want to have the flash beaming all over the place, looking like there's a flash illuminating the scene. That's not the purpose of the flash. The purpose of the flash is to take down those overexposed areas. 99% of the time, that's what the flash is going to be used for. And again, back in Adobe Bridge, I'm going to take this into Camera Raw and just show you the problems that we would face if we were going to use a flash image for the outside exterior view. Now, the flash image can result in a better looking exterior view in the fact that it may look like it has more life. Let me show you an example. So I'll have this right here, and I'll use this non-flash image. So I'll just make some quick adjustments to this. Again, we're not editing these images, we're just illustrating certain points. Okay, so here's our non-flash image, and here is our flash image. Sometimes when it comes to the non-flash images of the exterior views, they will look very desaturated, they will look very lifeless, they will not look like they are alive, and sometimes the flash will give you a better exterior view. So just use your best judgment. If you think that your flash images are giving you a much more desirable image overall when it comes to your exterior views, I'll use these two as an example. If your flash is giving you a much more desirable result, then go with it. But just be careful of the fact that, if you use those, more than likely you're going to have the flash bouncing off the ceiling, which is how you need to be using your flash. And you never point the flash at anything. You bounce it off the ceiling. It's sticking straight up. You're bouncing it off the ceiling, and more than likely it's going to result in those harsh reflections. If you're good at editing and post-production, you can easily remove those. Those aren't big issues, but they are going to be more time-consuming if you end up going with an exterior view shot of your exposure that used the flash, right? Just keep that in mind. It's going to be more time-consuming than it would using a non-flash image like this one. But I wanted to highlight and illustrate an additional benefit of the flash itself, in the fact that sometimes you can get a more desirable outside exterior view with the flash images. Sometimes they're gonna look like they have more life to them, more color, more contrast. The brightness may look better. It may look better overall compared to the non-flash images. This is what I do. I typically, if I see benefits with the flash, I'll usually do a blend of each. So if I was editing this image right here, I would use this non-flash image for these windows right here. And then I would use the flash image for these two windows right here, because these look like they have more life to them. And I would be able to add more contrast. I would be able to adjust the sky, the ocean, add more hues and saturation than I would with this one. This one looks a little bit more lifeless to me. It's very purple. Obviously, I can balance the colors and add more green, make it warmer, cooler, things like that. But overall, I feel like this flash has a lot more life. So that is certainly an additional benefit of the flash, but generally the main purpose is to just use it to bring in those overexposed areas. And again, here is the finished and final image. It came out looking great. And again, it doesn't look like there was a flash used. That's what you want to do with your post-production, your editing. That's why it's so important to learn actual post-production, because your photography is not going to come to life. It's not going to shine. If you're the photographer, you need to get serious about editing, learning Photoshop, computer graphics in general. If that's not you and you're not about doing all that because it's going to take too much time, you feel like you're too old, whatever the reason is, then you need to find somebody that is a competent post-production artist that you can rely on, because your images and your overall photography are not going to look good, and you're probably not going to survive in the market for very long. So moving on, here is a master bath image. So let's take a look at the raw images for this one. Okay, so here are the raw images for that shot, and we will just cycle through these. Whenever I look at these raw images, they look so bad, so lifeless, and so dead. But then when you look at the final image, I mean, it's absolutely night and day. Everything is incredible because the post-production is what brings it all together. Again, I'm going to stress that throughout the video of just how important editing the images properly truly is. So here is the non-flash image. I would use this as my base again. And the third and final point of how you can use a flash. So I'm going to recap this real quick. The primary purpose is to take down the exposure of the overexposed areas of the windows. It's to tame and neutralize those areas. That's the primary purpose. That's what it's going to be used for 90% of the time. The second benefit of the flash is sometimes the flash will produce a more desirable result of the outside exterior view. Sometimes it will look like it has more life. The brightness, the overall colors are more desirable in comparison to sometimes how flat and dull the non-flash images look. Right? That's the second reason, second benefit of the flash. And the third and final benefit of the flash is that sometimes when the flash bounces off the ceiling and all of the light and the photons are bouncing all around the place, what happens is that it will give you a more desirable result in the surrounding area, in the fact that the colors and the overall brightness of the image may have more life. So in this particular image, I'm looking at basically this right-hand side of the image, and to me, this looks more desirable. It's a much more interesting result in comparison to the non-flash image. So here's the non-flash image, and here's the flash image. When we zoom in, we can see that we're not getting bad characteristics of the flash itself. The flash isn't creating harsh shadows over here. We're not getting the flash beaming off of this area over here. It's not beaming off of the metallic surfaces of the faucets, things like that, the handles. It just looks better, in my opinion. It looks like it has more life. There's more brightness. The colors overall are much more interesting to me. It's not a major difference, but it is significant in my opinion. So again, looking at the non-flash versus the flash, I would paint this flash image into my document in Photoshop because it's just more interesting overall. Now, I wouldn't take that flash image and just go to town and start painting it into the ceilings everywhere. I'm focusing and isolating that flash image into certain areas, and I'm using it for that specific purpose. So again, to recap, the primary purpose of the flash is to take down the overexposed areas of the window frames. You can also use it to get a better outside view, and it will sometimes, the third and final is that sometimes it will result in a better characteristics in certain parts of the room. And in this example, it results in a better and more interesting and more lively look on this right-hand side compared to the non-flash image, which is somewhat dull and lifeless. And again, here is the final image. As you can see, I brushed in that flash over here, and it resulted in a much more lively, bright, colorful, much more exciting and image overall, and it's just more alive in my opinion. Everything came out very nice. But again, 90% of what's being used here is the non-flash. And with this property, we have one more quick example that we will get right through. Here's the final image. And again, here we are in Adobe Bridge, just cycling through the raw images. Again, here's the non-flash. Here's the flash, another flash, one more, another, and another. And then finally, no more flash, no more flash, no more flash. And again, cycling through those once more. And again, as I made the point earlier, the darker we bring down the exposure and the darker the image becomes while we're using the flash, the more apparent it will become that we are using a flash. As you can see, the flash is bouncing off the ceiling, and then it's bouncing off of the rim and the edge of everything in the shot. So this is what you want to avoid. You want to avoid those characteristics when you're editing your photos. Remove these things. Unless it's truly making the image look better, it has to go. It's that simple. And again, if you decide to use the flash image for your exterior view, again, the photographer has to go, the reflections have to go, everything has to go from the outside view. Nothing can be left in here. I see all the time people leaving the reflection from the flash. It has to go 100% of the time. There are no exceptions. Things have to be very, very clean and consistent. So here are a few more examples from another home. This property was extremely difficult to edit because the colors of the walls, there was wood all throughout this home. The woods and wallpapers that are brown, orange, yellow, colors like that are extremely difficult to balance and neutralize and tame. It's very difficult to bring all these things together, such as the colors and the contrast, the brightness, and composite everything in a professional manner. This is an extremely difficult property, but I'm gonna show you. Wanted to show you this one because of just how important it is when it comes to the flash, and just how much the flash helped to bring all of these things together. So we'll take a look at this image right here. So here we are in Adobe Bridge with all of the raw images, and we will just go through these real quick. So again, here are the non-flash images, which look pretty good. But again, the windows are completely blown out. This is going to be very difficult to edit without the flash because we're going to get that fringe. It's the light itself is basically eating away at the handle. It's eating away at the door frame. It's almost like acid. It's just eating away everything. It's so important to know how to use the flash properly. So here's the, just going through these again real quick. Here's the non-flash, 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 and then finally some flash images. Again, we're just bouncing it off of the ceiling. Sometimes you need to cover up the flash itself slightly with your hand, maybe 2 or 3 inches above it. What that will do is basically you'll be able to get what's going to happen when you do that, when you cover the flash with your hand, is that you're going to be able to get the good characteristics of the windows being tamed and toned down without the illumination that occurs with the flash. So this is a good example of how to use the flash right here. And here's an example where the flash is just bouncing off of the ceiling. You can see how major of a difference, especially with this one. This one is also using the flash, but you can see just how major of a difference it is when you're not covering up the flash with your hand. This one is just bouncing off the ceiling with nothing covering it up. It's illuminating everything. It's illuminating the wood on the side, which looks terrible. It's illuminating the edges of the box over here. This lamp over here has this harsh shadow. This is what I see people do all the time with their flashes, and it looks terrible. You have to know how to use your flash properly. Again, never point your flash at anything other than the ceiling. It is standing straight up, mounted to your camera. That's it. Other than that, you need to learn how to cover up the flash itself when you fire it. When you know how to do that properly, you'll get an image that looks like this. This is using the flash, but it's in such a subtle manner now. Basically, we're eliminating those unwanted characteristics of the flash, but at the same time, we're getting the desirable characteristics of the flash when it comes to taking down those overexposed areas. Again, we're using the flash here and we're covering it up just slightly, usually 2 to 3 inches above the flash itself is where your hand will be covering it up. You don't cover it up completely. Your hand is not on the flash physically making contact. It's generally, your hand is generally flat, usually 2 to 3 inches above the flash itself. And again, the purpose of that is to eliminate that ridiculous flash look while maintaining the benefits of the flash, which is to bring down those overexposed areas. This is so important, an absolutely critical point of how to use the flash. But again, when it comes to editing these, again, you can see just how important the flash is and how important it is to use it properly. Non-flash, non-flash, and then a few images with the flash. And I would take this into Photoshop, and I would crank up the contrast, overall brightness, things like that. I would make all my basic adjustments, and I'm not focusing on anything, nothing other than those areas. And be careful when you use these different exposures. You don't want to get this. You don't want the door frame to become dark brown or black or anything like that. Things have to be edited properly. You have to know where those fine lines are about the adjustments that you can make. You have to understand what looks good and what does not look good, which again is why I constantly stress post-production and editing skills. It's not something that you're going to be born with. Very few people know how to edit properly. They don't know what makes an image look good, and they don't understand the things that they need to avoid. But again, I would just make all the basic adjustments, and then I would bring this into Photoshop using my non-flash image, and I would paint that flash image into these overexposed areas. That's the purpose of the flash right there. And just as another example from this property, scrolling through these, cycling through the raw images, you can see just how overblown everything is in the window area. And again, here is a flash image. The photographer is using the flash properly. I can tell that this is a flash image because of how these things look at the top. This is perfect. It is excellent. It's exactly what I need as an editor. The photographer has to know the proper workflow of what to get and what to achieve in the field when they're on a shoot. That way, when the images come back to me, it will be just so quick, so easy, so simple. There will be no guesswork. I will know exactly what I'm going to get. And there has to be that consistency, and there has to be that communication between the photographer and the editors. If there's not that constant communication and understanding about what they both need, the synergy will not be there. There has to be a synergy. There's two equations, the photographer and the editor. They have to both be giving each other what they need, right? The editor has to produce excellent results. The photographer has to produce excellent results in the field. And again, here is the final result. Again, I'm not saying it's necessarily perfect by any means. These photos took a very long time. I believe this property had over 40 full images to edit. I simply did not have the time to make everything perfect. Again, it all comes down to how much time you have. And just as a few more examples of how to use the flash properly, we're going to take a look at these two images right here in Photoshop. I've got the PSDs open for both of these. Again, here is my non-flash image. Here is my flash image. This is the flash image. It's bouncing off the ceiling. Again, you want to avoid this look right here. The flash illuminating everything, creating those harsh shadows, the harsh light that bounces off the ceiling. The purpose of the flash is very specific. It's just to bring in the overexposed areas. That's the main purpose. I can't stress that enough. So again, just going through the PSD. Here's my non-flash image. Here's the flash image that I painted in. Added a little bit of brightness, a little bit of contrast maybe. Masked everything in. Did that right there. Merged everything onto a new layer. That way I can adjust and fix the lens distortion. And I just sharpened the image and removed the reflection from the ceiling light. It's so basic and easy to understand. Again, non-flash, flash image painted in, added brightness, masked everything in for the exterior, fixed the lens distortion, and then sharpened the image. And that is the final image. I should have taken down the overexposed area on the countertop, but I did not. Forgot to do that, but overall it's a very clean looking image, and that is pretty much the purpose of the flash. And then we'll take a look at this one real quick. Again, non-flash image. It's overexposed. Here's the flash image. You can tell it's a flash because it has that look that's beaming off. It's creating that white flash-like illumination off of everything that it hits, basically. Here's the non-flash versus the flash. You can tell that it is a flash. You can see just how major of a difference that is. But again, the purpose of the flash is just to bring in those overexposed areas when needed. And that's what I did with that. Just painted it in, added some brightness, brought in the outside, removed the power lines outside, added some saturation, and then sharpened the image. Again, really, really clean, consistent, basic editing. You just have to know how to make things look good. You have to know how to bring it all together. Anybody can learn Photoshop. They can learn the tools in this program. It doesn't matter at the end of the day, because if they don't know how to make an image look good, it's just not going to come together. You have to know what you're doing. And as a few quick examples, I just wanted to show you that you don't always have to use the flash for each shot. And I also wanted to illustrate the fact, again, that the purpose of the flash is maybe 10% of the shot. 90% of the shot is going to be your non-flash images. Especially when it comes to nighttime shots, the flash more than likely won't be used and it won't be necessary. Each of these shots right here, none of them had a flash. None of them. None of these images were taken using a flash. Not a single one. And they all look excellent because the photographer knew exactly what exposures to get, and the editor, me, knew how to bring it all together. Again, there was no flash for these images, and they came out very consistent and very clean. I wish I could have cooled this image down just a tad. Maybe this one, but overall they look very good. They look very good and pleasing for nighttime shots. Again, no flash was used. And here are the raw images for one of the lanai shots. I believe there's only about 4, 5, maybe 6 total. I usually only end up using maybe 2. I don't need a lot to work with. I just need a few things that were well done. Again, none of these had a flash. And here are 2 more images that were captured just using the camera itself. No flash was needed for these 2 photos right here. Just illustrating the point about how it's not always necessary to use a flash. Typically at nighttime, it won't be needed. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't. But hopefully I've done a good job illustrating and showing you how to use the flash and the overall purpose of the flash itself. Again, the main purpose of the flash is to take down the overexposed areas of the windows. There's very few other benefits outside of that. There's 3 things, and I discussed those earlier. For the most part, you're not going to need the flash for 90% of the shot. It has a very specific use. So the flash needs to be used properly. Everything has to be done properly. So hopefully I've done a decent job helping you to understand certain aspects of the flash, how to use it, and what its overall purpose is when it comes to real estate photography.